Seraphine Caldwell learned early that the safest thing a woman could be was forgettable. She wore gray coats. She kept her silver hair tied back. She walked with her eyes on the pavement and her shoulders pulled in, like a person trying to take up as little space in the world as possible. In the small city of Millhaven, where the streets smelled of bread from the bakery on Fifth, and the evenings came in quietly, she had managed something most people in her world considered impossible. She had disappeared, not from life, from the kind of life that had been planned for her. 10 years ago, at the age of 20, Seraphine had stood in a great stone hall, surrounded by fire and ancient ceremony, wearing white, waiting to be claimed. That was the word they used, claimed, as though she were land, as though a woman's future was simply a territory to be won by the strongest man in the room. And in that room, the strongest man had been Cale Dravenmore. She still remembered the moment she first saw him across the hall, standing apart from the others, as though even the air gave him extra space. He was not loud. He did not perform the way the other alphas did, circling and posturing and making sure everyone noticed their strength. Cale simply stood, watching the room with gray eyes that seemed to already know everything that was going to happen. Their eyes met once, only once. That was enough. What followed between them was not part of the ceremony. It was brief and unplanned, and real, in a way that nothing else in that formal stone world had ever felt to Seraphine. By the time dawn came, she understood two things clearly. First, that Cale Dravenmore was not the man she had expected him to be. Second, that she was in a great deal of trouble. Because she already knew, even then, what her body was telling her, and she knew what it meant. She left before the binding ceremony. She packed a single bag in the hour before sunrise, walked through a side gate, and did not look back. She told herself she was protecting herself. By the time she reached Millhaven, 3 months later, she understood she was protecting someone else too. Eli was born in a small hospital on the edge of the city. He came into the world quietly, which surprised the nurses, who expected more noise. He had a full head of dark hair, and eyes that were blue for about 2 weeks before they settled into gray. Storm gray, the kind that watched everything. Seraphine looked at him in the hospital bed and felt two things at once. A love so complete it frightened her, and a grief she would not name out loud. She named him Eli Caldwell, her name, her son. She found a job at the Millhaven Public Library, which suited her perfectly. Libraries were places where silence was respected, and questions were welcome, and nobody thought it was strange to spend hours surrounded by books. She was good at her work. She was kind to the children who came in after school, patient with the elderly patrons who needed help with the computer terminals, and honest with everyone. She raised Eli in a small apartment above a dry cleaning shop. The apartment had 3 rooms, one window that stuck in summer, and radiators that knocked all winter like someone was perpetually trying to get in. She bought second-hand furniture, and filled the shelves with books and grew herbs on the kitchen windowsill, partly because she liked the smell of them, and partly because certain combinations kept other things from smelling her. Eli grew up curious and quiet and kind. He loved books the way she did, not just as stories but as objects. He liked the weight of them, the texture of the pages, the particular smell of old ink. He pressed wildflowers between the pages of his favorites. He asked questions about everything. He was gentle with small animals and fiercely protective of his mother in the low-key, watchful way of a child who has understood from very young that the two of them were a unit and that units look after each other. He also, from time to time, growled at things. Not loudly, just a low vibration in his chest when something startled him, or when he felt that his mother was being treated unfairly. Seraphine always pretended not to notice. She stroked his hair and changed the subject, and at night, when he was asleep, she sat at the kitchen table and thought about how much longer she had. She knew it couldn't last forever. It was a Tuesday in October when she felt the first real change in Eli. He was shelving books beside her in the children's section when the neighbor's German shepherd pushed through the library's open door and bounded toward them. Seraphine reached for Eli's shoulder automatically. What came out of her 9-year-old son was not a child's noise. It was a sound from somewhere much older, low and certain. And the dog stopped immediately, backed up 3 steps, and sat down with its tail between its legs. Seraphine looked at Eli. Eli looked at her. Neither of them said anything. That night, She sat at the kitchen table for a long time after he went to bed. She had prepared for this. She had contacts. Other women who had made the same kind of choices she had, living quietly in human towns, raising children who were not entirely ordinary. One of them sent her a message 2 weeks later that turned her stomach cold. A scout had been seen in the region. Iron Veil markings. It wasn't confirmed. It might have been routine, but Seraphine had survived 10 years by trusting her instincts, and her instincts told her that routine was over. She began packing their important documents. She told herself she was just being careful. She was not prepared for the knock at her library door on a gray Thursday morning. She was in the back room sorting returned books when she heard the front door open. She came around the corner expecting a patron, and instead, she found a man standing in the entrance of the children's section, still and quiet, looking at the shelves around him the way he had once looked around a stone hall, as though he already knew everything that was going to happen. 10 years, gray eyes, the same stillness. Cale Dravenmore looked at her, and did not say anything at all for a long moment. Seraphine, he said finally, just her name, nothing attached to it. She did not run. She had done that already, and she was tired of it. And something in her, something she had kept pressed down for 10 years like a flower between pages, rose up and refused to let her move. "How did you find me?" she asked. "Eli," he said simply. She closed her eyes briefly. Of course it was Eli. She told Cale to come back at closing time. He nodded and left without argument, which surprised her. She spent the rest of the day moving through her work on automatic, straightening books that were already straight, answering questions she barely heard. At 6 o'clock he was at the door again. She let him in. They sat at the small table in the back room, where she ate her lunch, and she told him everything. She told him about the night she left, about Eli, about Millhaven, about the herbs on the windowsill, and the false surname, and the 10 years of careful, quiet, gray coat invisibility. She told him about the fear, not of him, not exactly, but of what claiming her would have meant, of what his counsel would have done with a child, of what she would have become inside those walls. Cale listened. He did not interrupt. He did not defend himself, or argue, or tell her she had been wrong. When she finished, he was quiet for what felt like a long time. "You didn't trust me," he said. "I didn't know you," she answered. "I only knew what you were." That sat between them like something that had been said and could not be unsaid. Eli met his father the next afternoon. Seraphine had thought of many ways to arrange it, and in the end chose the simplest. She brought Cale to the apartment, she made tea she didn't drink, and she said to her son, "This is someone I knew a long time ago, someone important." Eli looked at Cale for a long, measuring moment. He had his father's way of doing that, taking his time, not filling silence with noise. "You smell like me," Eli said. Cale crouched down to the boy's height. He didn't make a speech. He didn't announce himself or explain himself or perform any of the things Seraphine might have expected from a king meeting a secret heir. He said, "Yeah, I do." Eli seemed to find this satisfactory. Over the next several days, something Seraphine had not planned for began to happen. Cale came back. Every morning, not to negotiate or demand or make declarations. He came because Eli's wolf was surfacing, and a boy that age needed guidance that Seraphine, as an Omega, could not give him. She watched Cale take her son to the small park 2 streets over, and teach him to breathe through the change, to let the feeling come without fighting it, to understand the animal inside him not as something frightening but as something that was simply part of what he was. She watched her son relax, slowly, in the way a child relaxes when they feel finally properly understood. She watched a father and a son find each other in a park in a human city, and she felt the architecture of her carefully built walls begin, very slowly, to come apart. The council arrived on a Wednesday, 2 men in expensive coats with legal documents, and the particular expression of people who are certain their authority is absolute. They came to the apartment building, which meant they had the address, which meant they had been watching longer than Cale had admitted. They spoke about bloodline verification. They spoke about formal registration. They spoke about Seraphine's decade away, as though she had committed a crime by surviving it. They spoke about Eli with a flatness that made something in her go very still and very cold. Cale was standing in the hallway behind them, He let them speak, then he stepped forward. What he said was quiet. That was what she remembered afterward, how quiet it was. He did not raise his voice or pound the walls. He simply said that Seraphine had protected his son when he had not known his son existed, and that neither she nor Eli would be spoken about in that manner, in his presence or outside it. The councilmen left. Seraphine stood in the hallway for a moment afterward, not quite sure what to do with what had just happened. Cale came to her that evening and told her the truth as plainly as he knew how to tell it. They could not stay hidden. Eli's scent was already logged in at least 2 territory records. The bloodline question would be raised formally before the end of the month, and once it was raised, Seraphine had no legal standing to refuse it. The only real protection available to Eli, the kind that would hold across every territory and every council, was formal recognition as crown heir at Ironvale. "And me?" she asked. "Whatever you want," he said. "Whatever title, whatever arrangement. I will not force anything." She looked at him. Really looked at him, the way she had been carefully avoiding since the library door opened 3 weeks ago. "You've changed," she said. "It's been 10 years," he replied. "So have you." She asked for one night to think. He said he would wait. There was no weight in the way he said it, no pressure or performance. It was simply a fact. He would wait. She sat at the kitchen table after he left, in the apartment she had built into a life, looking at the herb pots on the windowsill, and the stacks of Eli's books, and the pressing of a small yellow wildflower tucked into the edge of the shelf. She thought about running. She acknowledged the thought clearly, the way she had learned to acknowledge things that frightened her, and then she set it down. She was tired of gray coats. She told Eli in the morning, not every detail. He was 9, and 9-year-olds deserve the truth in sizes they can carry. She told him that his father was a king. She told him that they were going to live somewhere new. She told him that she had been keeping them safe all this time, and that it was time to stop hiding, because hiding and being safe were not the same thing, and she had spent too long treating them as though they were. Eli listened to all of this with his gray eyes steady and his hands folded in his lap. "Did you love him?" he asked. "Before?" She was quiet for a moment. Outside the window, the city was doing its ordinary morning things. A bus, a dog, someone's radio playing something she couldn't quite make out. "I didn't know him well enough to love him," she said honestly, "but I think I might be starting to." Eli nodded. He picked up his backpack. "Okay," he said. "Can I bring all my books?" "We'll find a way," she said.
Sir Raftooths.
She let him pack his books first, then his pressed wildflowers. Then she packed her own things, standing in the bedroom she had lived in for a decade, folding clothes with steady hands. The drive to Ironvale took several hours. The city gave way to smaller towns, then open road, then forest so thick the light came through in pieces. Eli fell asleep against the window. Seraphine drove and did not turn the radio on. She had spent 10 years filling silence with noise to keep herself from thinking. She didn't need to do that anymore. The iron gates of Ironvale came into view as the sun was dropping low, and the forest opened, and there was the palace, stone and dark wood, and old enormous history, exactly as she remembered it. Cale was standing at the top of the entrance steps. No ceremony, no audience. Just him, in a dark coat, waiting the way she was beginning to understand he always had. Eli woke as the car stopped. He looked at the palace, then at the man at the top of the steps, and without a word, he opened the door and ran. Cale caught him at the top of the stairs. He lifted the boy the way fathers do, easily, like it had always been natural, and Seraphine saw something in his face that she did not have a word for, a kind of quiet that was not emptiness, but its exact opposite. She got out of the car slowly. She walked up the steps. The stone was cold under her feet, even through her shoes, and the air smelled of pine and iron, and something old she could not name. Cale put Eli down. Eli ran inside, already curious, already at home, in the way children can be, when the world suddenly makes sense to them. Cale turned to her. He held out his hand. Not a command, not a ceremony, a hand, extended, by a man who had learned that waiting was only worth something if you were willing to let the other person choose. She looked at it for a moment, then she took it. The door was open behind them, and the light inside was warm, and for the first time in 10 years, Seraphine Caldwell walked forward without looking back.